The first time I realized my family planned to erase me, it wasn't loud. It happened in a conference room with beige walls, bad coffee, and my name already printed at the bottom of a document I hadn't seen before. I was 32 years old enough to know when something was wrong, old enough to know when silence was being used as a weapon. My name is Natalie Brooks. I grew up in Northern California, in a family that owned a regional construction supply company called Brooks & Sons. 3 generations. My grandfather built it, my father expanded it. My older brother Daniel was supposed to inherit it. I was never supposed to ask questions. That afternoon, my father asked me to stop by the office real quick. That was his phrase. Real quick always meant serious, but never honest. Daniel was already there when I arrived. So was his wife, Lauren. So was my mother. Everyone except me looked prepared. There was a man I didn't recognize sitting at the end of the table. Gray suit, legal smile. "Natalie," my father said, standing. "Thanks for coming." I sat down slowly. The chair felt colder than the others. The man in the suit slid a folder toward me. "This is just a formality," my father said. "We're updating the estate plan." I opened the folder. It wasn't one document. It was several. Dense. Precise. Final. Waiver of interest. Consent to transfer. Acknowledgement of non-involvement. I didn't react. Not because I wasn't shocked. Because I'd learned long ago that reaction was what they waited for. Reaction gave them leverage. "What is this?" I asked. Daniel didn't look at me. He stared at the table like it was absorbing his guilt. "It's just paperwork," my mother said quickly. "You know you were never interested in the business." That wasn't true. I'd worked summers there. I'd handled vendor disputes when Daniel disappeared. I'd covered payroll when my father was hospitalized. I just hadn't been invited into the room where decisions were made. The lawyer cleared his throat. "By signing, you acknowledge that you hold no ownership stake, present or future, in Brooks & Sons or any affiliated entities." I flipped a page. "And this?" I asked. "That confirms you won't contest the will," my father said. There it was. Not a discussion. A conclusion. I looked at him. "When were you going to tell me?" He hesitated. Just a fraction too long. "We are telling you," he said. "Now." Lauren finally spoke. "Natalie, this is for the best. You don't want the stress Daniel deals with." Daniel's jaw tightened. I closed the folder. "No," I said calmly. "I want transparency." The room stiffened. My father's voice hardened. "Don't make this difficult." That sentence had shaped my entire childhood. I stood up. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. My mother gasped like I'd slapped someone. "This is selfish," she said. "After everything we've done for you." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply picked up my purse. "I'll have my attorney review it," I said. My father stood too. "You don't need a lawyer." That told me everything. I left without another word. In the parking lot, my hands shook as I unlocked my car. Not from fear, from clarity. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend. I didn't pace the apartment replaying the conversation. I reread the documents, every clause, every assumption. And then I did something my family never expected. I looked up property records tied to Brooks & Sons. What I found made my stomach go still. The company headquarters, the warehouse, the land beneath both. They weren't owned by the company. They were owned by a private holding trust, and my name was on it, not as an owner, as a contingent beneficiary. That was why they needed my signature. They weren't cutting me out because I didn't matter. They were cutting me out because I did, and they were running out of time. I called the first lawyer on my list the next morning. By noon, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a family disagreement. It was a premeditated betrayal. And if they thought I would disappear quietly, they had misunderstood me completely. Because the moment they tried to erase me, they taught me exactly where to strike back. The lawyer's name was Evelyn Hart. She didn't smile when we met. She didn't soften her words. She listened the way surgeons do before they cut. I laid the documents on her desk, followed by the printouts I'd pulled from the county property database. Deeds, trust registrations, shell entities tied together with addresses I recognized too well. She read everything in silence. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. "They didn't expect you to look," she said. "No," I replied. "They expected me to sign." Evelyn slid one document back toward me. "This holding trust, When was it created? 6 years ago, I said. Right after my grandfather died. And your name? She asked. Added 3 years later, after my father's heart attack. She nodded slowly. You're not incidental. You're contingency. That word landed hard. They built a structure where control stays with your father and brother, she continued. But if something destabilizes them, assets don't disappear, they shift. To me, I said. Yes, she replied. But only if you don't waive it. I thought about my mother's voice. After everything we've done for you. What happens if I don't sign? I asked. They'll escalate, Evelyn said. Pressure, guilt, possibly threats. But legally? She paused. You have leverage, real leverage. I drove home in silence. That evening, my mother called. You embarrassed your father, she said. I asked a question. I replied. You implied we were hiding something. You were, I said calmly. She inhaled sharply. You're reading things you don't understand. I understand that my name appears in places you didn't mention. Her voice softened. Natalie, sweetheart, this is all precautionary. In case Daniel ever fails, I finished. She didn't deny it. We were protecting you, she said. By removing my choices? I asked. That's not what this is. It is, I said. You just don't like the language. She cried then. Quietly. Controlled. I didn't apologize. The next day, Daniel showed up at my apartment. He looked exhausted. His confidence had cracks now. You blindsided them, he said. I found the truth, I replied. That's different. He ran a hand through his hair. You were never supposed to be involved. There it is again, I said. Supposed. You don't want this, he insisted. This business eats people. Then why are you terrified of me knowing about it? He opened his mouth, closed it. You've always been better at handling people, he said. That's why they kept you separate. I studied him. That's not a compliment, I said. He sat down heavily. Dad's talking about revising the trust. Without me? I asked. With your signature, he replied. I nodded. Tell him no. Daniel looked up sharply. You're serious? I've never been more serious, I said. He stood, pacing. You're going to blow this up. No, I said. I'm going to stop holding it together for you. That night, Evelyn emailed me. She'd pulled full trust filings, amendments, internal memos referenced in attachments my family never showed me. One sentence stood out. In the event of incapacitation or dispute, Beneficiary B may assume controlling interest subject to consent. Beneficiary B. That was me. I called my grandmother. She was 91 and sharper than anyone in my family. They finally forced your hand, she said after I explained. You knew, I said. I suspected, she replied. Your grandfather insisted on it. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were surviving, she said. And they were counting on that. I closed my eyes. What do I do now? I asked. You stop being quiet, she said. But you stay kind to yourself. 2 days later, Evelyn filed a formal notice. Request for full disclosure of trust operations, asset transfers, and beneficiary communications. No accusations, just law. The response from my family was immediate. My father called. I didn't answer. My mother texted paragraphs. I didn't reply. Daniel sent one message. Please don't do this. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back. You already did. The following week, a letter arrived from my father's attorney. It was polite, firm, warning me of consequences, of family rupture, of unnecessary conflict. Evelyn read it once and laughed. They're afraid, she said. And they should be. That night, I lay awake thinking about the girl I used to be. The one who believed loyalty meant silence, that love meant compliance. I realized something then. They didn't underestimate my anger. They underestimated my patience. And patience, when it runs out, doesn't explode. It calculates. The disclosure request didn't blow anything up right away. That was the part people never understand. Real consequences don't arrive with noise. They arrive with delays, with calendar invites, with people suddenly circling back after years of certainty. 3 days after Evelyn filed the notice, my father's office manager called me. Not my father. Not Daniel. The office manager. Natalie, she said carefully, your father would like to meet. About what? I asked. She hesitated. He didn't say. I'll have my attorney contact his, I replied. Another pause. Of course. When I hung up, I felt something unfamiliar. Control. Evelyn warned me what would come next. They'll try to isolate you, make this about family emotion instead of legal exposure. She was right. The next call came from my Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister, the peacekeeper. I heard things are getting tense, she said gently. Your parents are devastated. I'm sure they are, I replied. Natalie, honey, is this really worth it? That question used to work on me. I answered it calmly. It depends what you think this is, she sighed. You know what I mean. No, I said. I don't. Silence. This is about fairness, she said finally. This is about consent, I replied. I was removed without it. She didn't respond. That night, Daniel texted me again. Dad's health isn't great. Stress is bad for him. I stared at the message, then showed it to Evelyn the next morning. Document everything, she said. Emotional pressure counts. The first batch of disclosures arrived the following week. Partial, sanitized, carefully incomplete. Evelyn spread them across her desk, tapping entries with her pen. They're showing you what they want you to see, she said. But they're confirming something more important. What? I asked. That they moved assets after you were added as beneficiary. I leaned forward. Moved how? Leases reassigned. Equipment sold to affiliated entities. Cash flow redirected. All legal on the surface, but timed. Timed for what? I asked. She looked at me. For you to be quiet. I felt my jaw tighten, but my voice stayed even. What happens if I'm not? They lose the ability to control the narrative, she said, and potentially the company. That afternoon, I went to the Brooks & Sons warehouse for the first time in years. No announcement, no appointment. The security guard recognized me immediately. Miss Brooks, he said, surprised. Didn't know you were coming by. I didn't either, I replied. I walked the floor slowly. Forklifts moving, orders being loaded, people working the way they always had, unaware that ownership lines were shifting under their feet. A manager I knew from years ago approached me. Long time, he said. Yes, I replied. Has anything changed? He laughed nervously. Depends who you ask. What do you mean? I asked. He lowered his voice. There have been rumors about selling off property, about Daniel pushing too hard. I nodded. And my father? He hesitated. He's not making the calls anymore. Not really. I thanked him and left. In my car, I finally let myself exhale. This wasn't theoretical. They were already losing control. 2 days later, Evelyn received an unexpected call from the trustee. Not my father's attorney, not the board. The trustee. He requested a meeting. That alone told us everything. They wouldn't bypass the family unless they were worried about liability, Evelyn said. The meeting was brief and tense. The trustees spoke carefully, choosing every word. There are concerns, he said, about how beneficiary interests were communicated. You mean not communicated? Evelyn replied. He didn't argue. There may have been assumptions, he said. Assumptions don't override fiduciary duty, Evelyn said. I watched him closely. His hands were folded too tightly, his voice too rehearsed. Are you aware, I asked calmly, that I was asked to waive my rights without disclosure? He swallowed. I was not informed of that. That was a lie. Or worse, a partial truth. I want a full audit, I said. Independent. The room went very still. That's a serious step, he said. So was hiding my status, I replied. He promised to review options. Evelyn smiled politely. We'll expect your response in writing. That evening, my mother showed up at my door, unannounced, unprepared. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just shaken. You're tearing this family apart, she said the moment I opened the door. I didn't invite her in. I didn't tear anything, I replied. I stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. She cried, loudly this time. You always make everything harder, she said. Why can't you just let Daniel have this? There it was. Not fairness, not protection, hierarchy. Because, I said quietly, you taught me not to give away what someone has to trick me into losing. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Who are you? She whispered. I held the door open. Someone you underestimated, I said. She left without another word. That night, Daniel called. Not to argue, to beg. I can fix this, he said. I can get you a payout. Quiet. Clean. No, I replied. Why not? He asked, his voice breaking. Because, I said, You don't get to decide what fixes me. Silence stretched between us. You're going to destroy everything, he said finally. I looked out my window at the city lights, steady and indifferent. No, I replied. I'm going to expose what was already unstable. When I hung up, my phone buzzed with an email notification. From Evelyn. Subject line. Urgent. The trustee had responded. He had agreed to an audit and requested protection from personal liability. They were no longer negotiating from strength. They were negotiating from fear. And fear, when it sets in, makes people careless. That was the opening they never planned for. The audit didn't begin with numbers. It began with silence. For 3 days after the trustee agreed, no one from my family contacted me. No calls, no texts, no intermediaries suddenly checking in. The absence felt deliberate, like a held breath. Evelyn noticed it too. They're regrouping, she said. That's when mistakes happen. The audit firm was based in San Jose. Independent, expensive, thorough. The kind of firm companies hire when they're trying to look cooperative while quietly panicking. The first request they sent was simple. All trust amendments, all asset transfers, all communications referencing beneficiary rights over the past 5 years. My father's attorney pushed back within hours, claimed scope concerns, claimed relevance issues. Evelyn responded with one sentence. Any refusal will be noted as obstruction. That ended the debate. 2 days later, Daniel emailed me directly. Subject line. We need to talk. I didn't reply. An hour later, he sent another message. This isn't going how Dad planned. That one made me pause. Not how Dad planned. Not how we planned. Not how the family planned. I forwarded the email to Evelyn. She replied almost immediately. Good. He's separating himself. That means pressure is cracking the hierarchy. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. This is Mark Feldman, the voice said. I represent Brooks & Sons. Then you should speak to my attorney, I replied. A pause. I was hoping to avoid escalation. So was I said. Until I was handed a waiver instead of the truth. Another pause. There may have been miscommunication, he said carefully. No, I replied. There was intent, he exhaled. Natalie, this audit could destabilize the company. It already is, I said. I didn't cause that. We could explore a settlement, he offered. Transparency first, I replied. Then we talk. He didn't argue. The next day, the audit firm requested interviews. Voluntary, they said. But the list of names told me everything. My father, Daniel, the trustee, 2 board members, and me. I went first. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to set the tone. The interview lasted 4 hours. I answered calmly. Precisely. I didn't speculate. I didn't editorialize. I told them about the meeting, the documents, the pressure to sign without disclosure. I showed them emails, texts, call logs. When they asked how it made me feel, I answered honestly. Excluded, I said. Managed. One of the auditors looked up. Do you believe this was coordinated? Yes, I replied. But not openly. That's the point. After the interview, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. Not because I was shaken. Because I was steady. That evening, my grandmother called. I hear things are moving, she said. They are, I replied. You won't like all of it, she warned. I don't need to, I said. I just need it to be real. She hummed softly. Your grandfather would be proud. The next interview was Daniel. He called me afterward. They asked about you, he said. What did you tell them? I asked. The truth, he replied. I waited. They asked if you were ever meant to inherit, he continued. I said no. I closed my eyes. And then? I asked. And then they asked why your name was added as beneficiary, he said quietly. And what did you say? That Dad insisted, he replied. After his heart attack, my stomach went cold. So you admitted it wasn't an accident, I said. Yes, he whispered. I didn't comfort him. 2 days later, the trustee resigned. No announcement, no explanation. Just a notice filed quietly with the court. Evelyn forwarded it to me with a single line. This is accelerating. My father finally called. Not from his office, from his personal phone. Natalie, he said. His voice sounded older. You're forcing my hand. You forced mine first, I replied. You're risking everything I built, he said. I'm exposing what you hid, I replied. You think this makes you powerful? He asked. I considered the question. No, I said. It makes me untouchable." He went silent. The next day, the audit firm requested emergency access to historical emails, specifically those sent during the 6 months following my grandfather's death. That was the window. That was where decisions were made, before structures hardened. Evelyn smiled when she saw the request. "They're circling something," she said. "What?" I asked. "Intent," she replied. "They're going to prove this wasn't succession. It was containment." That night, I dreamed of the conference room again, the beige walls, the bad coffee. But this time, the chair wasn't cold. It was empty, and I was standing. When I woke up, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Please stop. Your father isn't well." I stared at the screen. Then I typed one sentence. "Then you should have told me the truth when you had the chance." I didn't send anything else. By the end of the week, rumors started circulating, not among family. Among investors, board members asking questions, vendors requesting reassurances, banks quietly reviewing credit lines. The audit hadn't even concluded, and already the ground was shifting. That was the moment I understood something crucial. Revenge wasn't the audit. Revenge wasn't the exposure. Revenge was letting the system they built collapse under the weight of its own secrets. And they were about to realize they'd trained me too well to stop it. The first public consequence landed on a Wednesday morning, not in the form of a lawsuit, not in a headline. It came as an email from a regional bank I recognized immediately. Brooks & Sons' primary lender. Evelyn forwarded it to me with no commentary. Subject: Review of credit exposure. That was it. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, and read it twice. The language was neutral, almost polite. The bank was conducting a routine reassessment due to recent governance developments. Routine was a lie. They smelled instability. By noon, Daniel called. "They froze the line of credit," he said without greeting. "For how long?" I asked. "Until the audit finishes," he replied. "Or until Dad provides assurances." "And can he?" I asked. Silence answered me. That afternoon, Evelyn and I met in her office. She looked pleased in a way that wasn't celebratory, just precise. "This is what leverage looks like when it starts working," she said. "No accusations, just consequences." "Does this end it?" I asked. "No," she replied. "It accelerates it." The audit firm requested supplemental interviews. This time, not voluntary, subpoena-backed. 2 board members, the former trustee, my father's longtime accountant, and my mother. That one surprised me. "They're widening the lens," Evelyn said. "They're looking at who knew what and when." That evening, my mother called again. Her voice was unsteady. "They want to talk to me." "I know," I said. "You didn't have to drag me into this," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "They did when they made you part of it." She started crying. "I just did what your father said," she whispered. "That's not a defense," I said gently. "That's a pattern." She hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, Daniel showed up at my apartment. He looked worse than before. Unshaven, eyes rimmed red. "This is out of control," he said the moment I opened the door. I didn't invite him in. We stood in the hallway. "What did you think would happen?" I asked. "I thought you'd take the payout," he snapped. "I thought you'd be practical." "I am being practical," I replied. "I'm protecting what was hidden in my name." "You don't even want the company," he said. "That's irrelevant," I replied. "I want agency." He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "They're talking about removing Dad completely," he said. "Good," I replied. His face hardened. "You hate him that much?" I shook my head. "I hate being used more." He took a step closer. "You're going to lose your family." I met his eyes. I lost them the day they asked me to sign away my future without explanation. That landed hard. He stepped back. "You always were the strong one," he muttered. "We just counted on it." That was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. The audit firm's preliminary findings arrived the following week. Not conclusions, indicators, patterns of asset shielding, selective disclosure, beneficiary manipulation. No crimes yet, but plenty of breaches. Evelyn summarized it simply. They treated the trust like a control mechanism, not a fiduciary responsibility. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now the board panics," she replied. She was right. An emergency board meeting was called. My father wasn't invited. That was the moment everything changed. Daniel called me afterward, his voice flat. They voted to suspend him, he said, pending the audit. I closed my eyes, not because I felt sorry for him, because I felt the weight of finality. My father called that night. For the first time, he didn't sound angry. He sounded afraid. You wanted power, he said. No, I replied. I wanted truth. You've humiliated me, he said. You humiliated yourself when you decided I didn't deserve a choice, I replied. You think you're better than us now? He asked. I paused. No, I said. I think I'm done being beneath you. He didn't respond. The next morning, news spread internally. Employees whispering, managers hedging, vendors asking questions. Brooks & Sons wasn't collapsing, but it was exposed. And exposure is fatal to people who build their authority on invisibility. Evelyn called me that afternoon. They've requested mediation, she said. With who? I asked. You, she replied. They want to contain this before regulators get involved. I laughed softly. Now they want to talk? Yes, she said. On record, with counsel present. I agreed. Not because I needed closure, but because I wanted something else. I wanted the moment when they had to look at me, across a table, and understand that silence was no longer an option. That evening, I stood at my window, watching the lights come on across the city. For the first time since this started, I felt something sharp and clean. Not anger, momentum. They had built their world assuming I would absorb the shock. Instead, I had redirected it. And now, every crack they'd hidden behind politeness and tradition was visible. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was structural. And it was only halfway finished. Mediation was scheduled for Friday morning. Neutral office. Neutral furniture. Neutral faces. Everything designed to soften impact. Evelyn warned me before we went in. They're not here to apologize, she said. They're here to salvage. I'm not looking for either, I replied. The conference room was smaller than the one where they'd first tried to erase me. That felt intentional. Less authority, less performance. My father arrived last. He looked diminished, not weak, stripped. The kind of man who'd lost the illusion that command alone could hold a structure upright. Daniel was already there, jaw tight. Lauren sat beside him, stiff and silent. My mother avoided my eyes completely. Across from us sat two board representatives, the company's outside counsel, and a mediator who introduced herself with practiced calm. We didn't shake hands. The mediator opened with procedure, confidentiality, intent, options. Then she turned to my father. Mr. Brooks, she said, your counsel has indicated you'd like to resolve outstanding beneficiary concerns. Beneficiary, not daughter. That shift mattered. My father nodded. This has gone far enough. I waited. We are prepared to offer Natalie a settlement, he continued. Generous. Final. Evelyn leaned forward. Before numbers are discussed, my client requires acknowledgement of the audit findings. Silence. The board counsel cleared his throat. The audit is ongoing. Yes, Evelyn replied. But preliminary findings are already impacting lenders, vendors, and governance. I spoke then. I don't want money, I said calmly. I want separation. My father looked at me sharply. Separation from what? From control, I replied. From being used as a contingency, without consent. Daniel shifted in his seat. Lauren stared at the table. The mediator raised a hand. Natalie, what does that look like to you? I had prepared this. Independent trusteeship, I said. Permanent. No family override. Full disclosure of trust activity. And formal recognition that I was improperly asked to waive rights without disclosure. My father laughed once. Bitter. You want us to confess. I want the truth recorded, I replied. Those are different things. The board representatives exchanged glances. That's a significant demand, one of them said. So was asking me to disappear quietly, I replied. Evelyn slid a document across the table. These are the terms under which my client will consider resolution. The mediator read silently. The room changed. Not emotionally, structurally, because the document wasn't aggressive. It was surgical. Each clause tied to audit findings. Each demand enforceable. No theatrics, no threats, just consequences. My father stood abruptly. This is extortion. The mediator responded calmly. No, this is negotiation. Daniel spoke for the first time. If we agree to this, what happens next? I met his eyes. You get to keep what survives transparency. That was the line that broke something. My father sank back into his chair. My mother finally looked at me. You planned this, she whispered. I shook my head. You did. I just stopped protecting it. After a long pause, the board council spoke. We need a recess. They left the room. We didn't follow. When they returned, the tone was different. Measured. Careful. We're prepared to accept the majority of these terms, the board council said, with modifications. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Which ones? The acknowledgement, he said. We can't frame it as misconduct. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Then there's no agreement. Silence again. The mediator looked at my father. Mr. Brooks, the alternative is continued audit escalation. He closed his eyes. I never thought you'd do this, he said quietly. I answered without raising my voice. That's because you never thought I mattered enough to. That was it. The agreement was signed 2 hours later. Independent trustee appointed. Asset separation enforced. Disclosure mandated. Family control limited. No apology. No forgiveness. Just a reset of power. When we stood to leave, Daniel stopped me. What happens now? He asked. I considered him for a moment. Now, I said, you live with what you tried to hide. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. Evelyn smiled faintly. You did well. I did what was necessary, I replied. That night, my father resigned from the board. Not announced, not celebrated. Filed. By the end of the week, the audit firm expanded its scope. Regulators requested information, and the company my family had treated like a private kingdom was now accountable to forces it could no longer intimidate. The revenge wasn't in watching them fall. It was in watching the system they built finally stop bending around them. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to see what they'd do next. I already had what I came for: control. Once the agreement was signed, everything sped up. Not in a chaotic way, in a way that felt inevitable, like gravity finally being acknowledged. Evelyn warned me that the period right after a structural shift is when the most damage surfaces. People panic, she said. They rush. They talk too much. She was right. Within a week, the independent trustee requested additional documentation that had never been included in prior disclosures. Side letters, informal approvals, email chains that referenced workarounds and temporary solutions. Temporary had lasted years. Daniel called me 3 days after the mediation. They're asking about the warehouse transfer, he said. The one from 5 years ago. I know, I replied. How do you know? He asked. Because it never made sense, I said. It was done during a quarter when cash flow didn't justify it. He was quiet. They think Dad used the trust to collateralize a loan without disclosure, he said. They don't think, I replied. They're confirming. Daniel exhaled sharply. This is bigger than you. I didn't argue. It always was. That same afternoon, a reporter called my phone. I didn't answer. Then another. And another. Evelyn advised silence. Let the structure speak, she said. You don't need to narrate this. So I didn't. Internally, Brooks & Sons was unraveling in ways no one could spin. Senior managers were asked to recertify approvals. Vendors demanded revised guarantees. The bank extended its freeze. The company wasn't failing, but it was exposed. And exposure is fatal to people who rely on control rather than competence. My mother called me late one night. Not crying this time. Angry. You've turned us into a spectacle, she said. I didn't call the auditors, I replied. I didn't call the banks. You didn't stop them either, she snapped. That's not my job, I said. You always think you're above this, she said. Like you're better than us. I paused. No, I said. I just stopped being beneath you. She hung up. 2 days later, Daniel was removed as interim CEO. Not permanently, provisionally. The board cited operational instability. He texted me the news with a single line. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Figure out who you are, without someone else absorbing the fallout. He never responded. The audit firm released its interim report at the end of the month. Not public. Yet. But the conclusions were clear. Breach of fiduciary duty, improper beneficiary handling, Failure of disclosure. Governance failures tied to a single decision-making authority. My father, the man who'd always said he was protecting the family. The board moved quickly after that. They voted to restructure ownership oversight entirely. Family members were barred from unilateral authority. Outside directors gained veto power. Brooks & Sons was no longer a family empire. It was a company. That distinction mattered. Evelyn and I met again to review the implications. They're going to look for a scapegoat, she said. Someone to carry this publicly. I know, I replied. And you're worried it'll be you? She asked. No, I said. I'm worried it won't. She studied me. Why? Because if they frame this as a family dispute, I said, they avoid accountability. She nodded slowly. Then we make sure they can't. The next move was deliberate. We authorized the release of selected findings to regulators. Not leaks. Submissions. Clean. Factual. Impossible to spin as emotional. Within 48 hours, state investigators requested formal cooperation. That was when my father showed up at my apartment. No call. I opened the door and found him standing there, older than I'd ever seen him. You've gone too far, he said. I didn't invite him in. You tried to erase me, I replied. This is the distance that creates. They're going to ruin me, he said. I looked at him carefully. No, I said. They're going to document you. That's the same thing, he snapped. No, I replied. One is personal. The other is factual. You could stop this, he said. You could withdraw. I shook my head. You taught me not to lie. He stared at me like he wanted to argue, then seemed to realize there was nothing left to say. When he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart steady. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. The next morning, the story broke. Not with my name. With the companies, Brooks & Sons under investigation for governance failures. No mention of a daughter. No mention of family drama. Just facts. That was the most satisfying part. They couldn't make this about my emotions. They couldn't reduce it to resentment. They had to deal with what they did. Evelyn called me later that day. This will get worse before it gets quiet, she said. I know, I replied. And you're okay with that? She asked. I looked out my window at the city. Unchanged and indifferent. Yes, I said, because I'm not standing in the blast radius anymore. The revenge wasn't seeing them fall apart. It was stepping far enough away that their collapse couldn't touch me. And the final consequence was still coming. Not for them, for me. Because once you dismantle the system that controlled you, you have to decide what to build in its place. The week after the investigation became public was quieter than I expected. No more calls from reporters. No frantic messages from relatives. The noise burned itself out quickly, leaving something more unsettling behind. Space. For the first time in my life, no one from my family was trying to manage my reactions. No one was calling to calibrate my tone, to tell me what was appropriate, to suggest what would look better. They had lost that right. I noticed the absence in small ways. Mornings felt slower. Decisions felt cleaner. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head before they happened. Evelyn called to check in. Not about legal matters, but about me. People underestimate this part, she said. After control is removed. What part? I asked. The emptiness, she replied. It scares people back into old patterns. It doesn't scare me, I said. Good, she replied. Then you're ready for the next decision. What decision? I asked. What you do with what you reclaimed, she said. That question stayed with me, because revenge had never been my goal. Agency was. The independent trustee scheduled a briefing for me later that week. It wasn't mandatory, just informational. I attended anyway. He laid out the current structure. Asset separation complete. Governance oversight tightened. No family override. Clear reporting lines. You have influence, he said, but no obligation. I prefer it that way, I replied. He hesitated, then continued. There is also an option to liquidate your interest. That caught my attention. Explain, I said. You could exit entirely, he said. Convert your position into a clean separation. No ongoing connection. I thought about that. Walking away completely. No more ties. No more references. No more context where my name was only relevant because of them. I'll consider it, I said. That night, I ran into Lauren at a grocery store. Pure coincidence. She looked startled when she saw me, then tired, then relieved. Hi, she said softly. Hi, I replied. We stood there, surrounded by shelves of cereal, neither of us moving. "I didn't know how to reach you," she said. "You didn't try," I replied, not unkindly. She swallowed. "I didn't know how bad it was." "I believe you," I said. She looked surprised. "I still participated," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You did." We stood in silence again. "I'm leaving Daniel," she said finally. That surprised me. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. "Because," she said, "I thought power was safety. And now I see what it costs." I nodded. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said. She hesitated. "Do you hate us?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "I outgrew you." She nodded, eyes wet, and walked away. That encounter stayed with me longer than the headlines, because it reminded me that everyone in that system had made choices, some louder than others, but none accidental. Later that week, my grandmother called again. "I hear the house is quiet," she said. "It is," I replied. "Good," she said. "Quiet lets you hear yourself." I smiled. She paused. "What will you do now?" I thought about it. "I don't want to inherit anything else," I said. "I want to build." "Then do," she replied. "And don't explain yourself." The next day, I made a decision. I authorized partial liquidation. Not everything, just enough to create distance. Enough that my future wouldn't be shaped by how their past unfolded. Evelyn approved. Clean. Strategic. Final. The paperwork took weeks. No drama, no confrontation. Just signatures. Wires. Closure. Daniel didn't reach out. My parents didn't either. I didn't expect them to. As the process finalized, something else happened. The investigation expanded, not because of me. Because once people stopped being afraid, they started telling the truth. Former employees came forward. Emails surfaced. Patterns repeated. My father's narrative collapsed completely, not with a scandal, with documentation. And then, just like that, it wasn't my story anymore. It was theirs. I walked through my apartment one evening, noticing how little of it reminded me of them. No heirlooms, no inherited furniture, no photographs staged to prove belonging. Everything in my space was chosen. That mattered. The revenge wasn't public humiliation. It wasn't financial ruin. It was this, the quiet certainty that I would never again be shaped by people who needed me small to feel powerful. And I was finally ready to talk about what came next. The strangest part wasn't the fallout. It was realizing that my life was no longer organized around responding to them. For years, every decision I made had an invisible second step. How would this land with my parents? How would Daniel spin it? Would this be seen as difficult, ungrateful, excessive? That second step disappeared quietly. The liquidation finalized on a Monday afternoon. Evelyn emailed confirmation. No congratulations, just numbers and dates. Clean. I closed my laptop and didn't open it again that day. I went for a long walk through my neighborhood, past houses that looked nothing like the ones I grew up in. Smaller, older, owned by people who didn't treat control like love. At a stoplight, I realized something. For the first time since this started, I wasn't waiting for the next consequence. There wasn't one. The investigation continued without me. I wasn't needed as a witness. My disclosures were complete. My exposure was minimal. I had stepped out of the blast radius entirely. Daniel emailed me that night. Short, unpolished. They're talking about selling the company. I read it once. Then again, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. I replied with a single sentence. I hope you make choices that don't require someone else to disappear. He never responded. The following week, my father's name appeared again in the news. Not prominently. Buried in an article about governance reform and internal accountability. Former CEO removed. No criminal charges announced. Yet. The word yet lingered like a held breath. My mother didn't call. She didn't text. That silence was louder than anything she'd ever said. I ran into an old family friend at a coffee shop one morning. Someone who used to ask me when I was going to settle down and stop causing tension. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "For what?" I asked. "For not seeing it sooner," she replied. I nodded. Most people don't, until it costs them nothing. She winced. That afternoon, Evelyn called. "There's one more thing," she said. "The board wants to formally acknowledge your role in triggering reform." "No," I I replied immediately. She laughed softly. I thought you'd say that. I don't want credit, I said. I want separation. That's already done, she replied. This is symbolic. Then it's unnecessary, I said. She didn't argue. Later that night, I opened an old notebook I'd kept during my 20s. Pages filled with lists, goals, reminders to be patient, to wait my turn. I tore out the first 10 pages and threw them away. Not because the girl who wrote them was wrong, because she didn't need to be careful anymore. The next call came from the independent trustee. There's an option we haven't discussed, he said. I listened. A minority stake in a new entity, he continued. Spun off. Clean leadership. No family involvement. I considered it. A chance to build something new, without the weight of inheritance, without legacy politics. I'll think about it, I said. After we hung up, I sat in silence. I realized then that this wasn't about revenge anymore. Revenge had been the doorway. What followed was choice. I could walk away completely, or I could take what I'd learned and apply it somewhere clean. Both were valid. That night, I dreamed of the conference room again, but this time, there was no table, no documents, just an open door. When I woke up, I knew which choice I'd make. But before that, there was one last thing I needed to do. Not for them, for myself. I didn't tell anyone what I was about to do. Not Evelyn. Not my grandmother. Not the trustee. This wasn't a legal step. It didn't need witnesses. It was something I delayed for years because I thought it required permission. It didn't. I drove north early on a Saturday morning, the kind of drive I used to make with a knot in my stomach, the kind where I rehearsed conversations that never went the way I planned. This time, the road felt neutral. The house was smaller than I remembered. It always is, when power leaves it. My parents' house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. Trimmed hedges, familiar porch, a place where I'd learned how to read people before I learned how to trust myself. I parked and sat for a moment, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. Then I walked up and rang the bell. My mother answered. She looked startled, then wary, then tired. Natalie, she said. Hi, I replied. She stepped aside without inviting me in. I took that as my cue to stay where I was. I won't stay long, I said. I just came to say something in person. She nodded, arms crossed. I'm not angry, I continued, and I'm not here to argue. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She was used to arguments. This was unfamiliar. I'm here to tell you that I'm done, I said. With what? She asked. With waiting, I replied. With hoping things will change if I explain better. With being the one who absorbs the discomfort so everyone else can stay comfortable. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I won't be coming to holidays, I said. I won't be checking in. And I won't be responding to messages meant to manage my feelings. Her voice trembled. So that's it? Yes, I said. And I'm okay with it. She searched my face. Maybe for anger. Maybe for guilt. There was neither. My father didn't come to the door. I didn't ask for him. That was intentional. I hope you find peace, I said. But it won't come through me anymore. She whispered my name like she used to when I was small. It didn't pull me back. I turned and walked down the path without looking behind me. When I got in my car, my hands were steady. The next week, I accepted the trustee's offer. Not the stake. The advisory role. Limited. Defined. With an exit clause. I would help build something new. Then step away. No permanence. No obligation disguised as honor. Evelyn approved immediately. This suits you, she said. It does, I replied. Work became purposeful in a way it never had before. Clean lines, clear authority, mutual respect. No emotional undercurrents, no landmines. I thrived in that environment, not because I was exceptional, but because no one needed me to be small. One evening, my grandmother called. I heard you visited, she said gently. Yes, I replied. And? She asked. I left lighter, I said. She smiled through the phone. That's how you know. A few days later, Daniel sent one last message. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I read it carefully. Then I replied, I'm sorry you didn't protect yourself. It was the most honest thing I could offer. The company announced its sale at the end of the quarter, not as a failure, as a restructuring. The Brooks name faded quietly into footnotes. I watched the news without emotion. It no longer defined me. That night, I stood in my apartment, surrounded by choices that were mine. No inheritance to manage, no approval to seek, just space. The last door wasn't slammed. It was closed, deliberately, and that made all the difference. After the house, there were no more dramatic gestures left. That surprised me. I'd always assumed closure would feel like something loud or cinematic. Instead, it arrived as a series of small, almost boring moments that stacked up until I realized nothing was pulling at me anymore. Weeks passed without contact, not silence charged with tension, just absence. The advisory work took shape quickly. Clear scope, defined timelines. I was consulted, not managed. Listened to, not corrected. I noticed how often people asked me what I thought without bracing themselves for disagreement. That alone felt like a revelation. One afternoon, a colleague asked where I'd learned to negotiate so cleanly. I didn't tell her it was survival. I just smiled and said, "Practice." The investigation concluded quietly. No charges announced, no dramatic sentencing, but penalties were issued, restrictions placed, records amended. The truth didn't need a spectacle. It needed permanence. I found out about my father's retirement through a third party. No call, no explanation. He stepped away from public life entirely. My mother moved closer to her sister. Daniel relocated out of state. The family dispersed, the way unstable structures do once their central support is removed. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how little I felt about it. Not numbness. Relief. My grandmother's health declined again that winter. I visited her often, sitting beside her bed while she slept, the room filled with quiet that felt earned. One afternoon, she woke and took my hand. "You did something important," she said softly. "I just stopped pretending," I replied. She smiled faintly. "That's the hardest thing there is." I didn't argue. At home, I began noticing details I'd overlooked before. The way my mornings belonged to me. The way my decisions no longer carried an invisible audience. The way peace didn't require permission. During the holidays, I hosted a small dinner, not to replace anything, just to mark something new. Friends gathered, laughter without context, food chosen because I liked it. No traditions to honor, no hierarchies to manage. At one point, I realized no one at the table knew the full story, and that felt right. Evelyn called near the end of the year. "You've done everything you needed to," she said, legally and otherwise. "I know," I replied. "What's next?" she asked. I thought about it. "Nothing urgent," I said. "And that feels like progress." She laughed. "It is." That night, I went through old files on my computer. Emails I'd saved. Documents I'd printed out of fear. I deleted them. Not because they didn't matter, because they no longer had power. As I shut down my laptop, I felt something settle into place. I wasn't defined by what I survived. I was defined by what I refused to carry forward. And there was only one chapter left. Not about them. About me. The last change didn't arrive with news. It arrived with quiet. I noticed it one morning when I realized I hadn't checked my phone for hours. No reflex. No background tension. No expectation that someone might need something from me that I hadn't already anticipated. I was drinking coffee by the window, watching the city wake up, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, my thoughts weren't looping backward. They were forward. That was new. The advisory role ended exactly when it was supposed to. No extensions, no pressure to stay. The trustee thanked me, sincerely, and asked if I'd consider something similar in the future. I told him I would. On my terms. He respected that. That alone confirmed I'd made the right choice. My grandmother passed quietly in early spring. No drama, no unfinished business, just a life that closed gently. At the service, people spoke about her strength, her clarity, her refusal to be managed, even in old age. I listened and smiled, because I recognized those traits now, not as inheritance, but as permission. She'd shown me what it looked like to stand still and let other people reveal themselves. Afterward, I went home and didn't feel empty. I felt complete. Weeks turned into months. My parents didn't reach out. Neither did Daniel. That silence wasn't punishment. It was honesty. They had nothing to offer me that didn't come with conditions, and I no longer negotiated with conditions disguised as love. One evening, I ran into someone who'd known me years ago, back when I was quieter, smaller, always accommodating. "You seem different," she said. "I am," I replied. "What changed?" she asked. I considered that carefully. I stopped explaining myself to people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I said. She nodded like that answer settled something for her, too. At home, I began writing again. Not about them. About patterns. About power that doesn't announce itself. About how often women are taught to absorb harm politely so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. I wrote for myself at first, then for others who might recognize the feeling of being erased, slowly, quietly, under the language of family, tradition, or love. I wasn't angry when I wrote. I was precise. That mattered. The revenge everyone expects is loud, public, punishing. Mine wasn't. Mine was structural. I removed myself from the system that depended on my silence. I refused to sign what was meant to erase me. I chose distance over performance. And in doing that, I didn't take anything from them. I took myself back. If you're listening to this and parts of it feel familiar, I want you to know something. Betrayal doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like paperwork slid across a table, like being told it's simpler this way, like being asked to trust people who never planned to be honest with you. Revenge doesn't have to be dramatic to be complete. Sometimes it's calling a lawyer. Sometimes it's not showing up anymore. Sometimes it's choosing a life where your value isn't negotiated in rooms you're barely allowed into. The moment you stop explaining your worth, the power shifts. Not because they change, because you do. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, managed, or quietly pushed aside by people who claimed to love you, leave a comment and tell me what moment made things clear for you. And if you want more stories like this about family drama, betrayal, karma, and what happens when the tables turn, without shouting, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay here. Some endings aren't about closure. They're about choosing yourself. And once you do, nothing ever fits the old shape again.